Imagine camping by a dark lake and suddenly seeing silhouettes standing still and watching you on the other shore. What if you looked into the water and saw another face next to your own reflection, a face that wasn't yours? Would you run away or try to uncover the truth? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video to dive deeper into the story. Let's get started. Asterisk. Four friends decided to spend a few days in nature at an old, abandoned campsite. The area, barely marked on maps, was located by a large lake and had once hosted summer camps before being shut down years ago. No one was truly safe there. They pitched their tents by the lake and lit a campfire. The first night was ordinary. They sang songs and watched the stars. But Lily felt a shiver down her spine when she noticed strange silhouettes forming across the lake. "What was that?" she whispered. She turned to her friends, but they saw nothing. Marcus chuckled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you trying to scare us?" Lily shook her head, her voice firm. "I swear, I saw something." They were standing still, just watching. Tension settled in the air, but as the night went on, they brushed off the incident, until Ethan went to fetch some water from the lake. As he bent down to fill his bottle, he noticed something in the reflection. A face. But there was no one there. The water was clear, the stars shimmered above, yet right next to Ethan, another face emerged, its presence merging with his own. Its mouth was agape, its eyes completely black. Ethan screamed and stumbled backward. The others ran to him. "What happened?" Ava asked. "There was a face in the lake." Marcus shone his flashlight over the water, but they only saw their own reflections. "You're just imagining things," Marcus said. Ethan tried to calm down, but that night, no one could sleep peacefully. Strange rustling sounds echoed outside. There was an eerie sensation, like something moving within the water. By dawn, Ethan was gone. They searched the area. His footprints trailed toward the lake, then suddenly stopped. His bag, phone, and shoes were still there. Lily looked at the water, fear gripping her. "We need to leave." Marcus hesitated. "We can't just leave him." But at that moment, Ethan's voice rang out. "Hey, I'm over here." The voice came from across the lake. Something was wrong. His voice sounded distorted, hollow. The three of them turned to look. Ethan was standing there, but he wasn't moving. His eyes were empty, and his face. It was trying to resemble Ethan, but it wasn't quite right. His lips were missing, his eyes were too big, and his skin was eerily smooth. Ava gasped and stepped back. "That's not Ethan." The fake Ethan tilted his head and started walking toward them. His smile stretched unnaturally, too wide, too sharp. Then he spoke. "We've been waiting for you." And then, the lake moved. From the depths, others began emerging, figures like the fake Ethan. Their faces were disturbingly human-like, but just wrong. Some had no eyes, some had mouths that stretched too far. They all stepped out of the water, advancing toward the shore. Marcus grabbed his bag and yelled, "Run!" Ava and Lily bolted after him, branches scratching their faces as they sprinted through the forest. Their hearts pounded in terror. But the creatures didn't chase them, because they had already taken what they wanted. Ethan. The real Ethan. He was never seen again. Years later, when new campers arrived at the lake, one of them noticed something strange in the water. A young man, staring from beneath the surface with empty eyes, grinning. And then he whispered softly, "We've been waiting for you." A group of friends decided to spend a weekend in the forest, surrounded by nature. Sophie's grandfather had visited this campsite years ago and had described it as a wonderful place. However, the old man had also mentioned that the campsite was once the site of a mysterious disappearance of a group of people. Of course, the young people didn't take such stories seriously. On Friday evening, they packed their camping bags and supplies into their cars and set off. The sun was about to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. After a journey of about 2 hours, they arrived at the campsite. Surrounded by dense pine trees and located by a small lake, the place truly looked mesmerizing. After parking their cars, they began setting up their tents, ready to start a great camping experience. Emily fell silent for a moment and glanced around. "Doesn't this place feel strangely eerie?" she asked. Ryan laughed. "You watch too many horror movies. It's just nature, quiet and peaceful," he said. However, Sophie hesitated for a moment as her grandfather's stories came to mind. But she didn't want to show her friends that she was scared. After nightfall, they lit the campfire and started roasting marshmallows while chatting. As the conversation went on, they began telling horror stories. Jack was in the middle of a story when a strange rustling sound came from the forest. Everyone fell silent and listened carefully. Ryan picked up his flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but he couldn't see anything. "It's probably just a deer or a raccoon," he said, laughing. However, Sophie felt that something was wrong. That night, everyone retreated to their tents, but Sophie couldn't fall asleep. Amid the faint howling of the wind, she heard a sound, as if someone was whispering. The next day, strange things started happening around the campsite. In front of Jack's tent, they found odd symbols carved into the mud. No one knew how to explain them. Ryan said, maybe they're old markings from native tribes. But when Sophie remembered the people her grandfather had mentioned, the ones who mysteriously vanished, fear crept into her heart. That day, they decided to go for a swim in the lake. The water was chilly at first, but they soon got used to it. However, Emily suddenly screamed and rushed out of the water. "Something grabbed my foot," she yelled. Ryan and Jack looked around in the water but saw nothing. "You probably got caught in some seaweed," Jack said, but Emily was certain that wasn't the case. As nightfall approached, everyone began feeling uneasy. While sitting around the fire, something caught Sophie's attention. In the darkness between the trees, she saw a pair of glowing eyes. "There's someone there," she whispered. When she pointed the flashlight, there was nothing. But deep in her heart, she knew they were not alone. Around midnight, everyone retreated to their tents. Sophie still couldn't sleep. Suddenly, a terrifying scream came from Ryan's tent. Everyone rushed out of their tents. Ryan's tent was in complete disarray, and he was gone. They grabbed their flashlights and searched the area, but there was no trace of him. Just then, a low growling sound came from the edge of the lake. When they pointed their flashlights in that direction, they saw something crawling on the ground, a humanoid figure, but rotten and decayed. The creature whispered in Ryan's voice, "Help me," but its face was unrecognizable. Panicked, all four of them sprinted toward their car, but the engine wouldn't start. Suddenly, whispers surrounded them from all directions. Sophie remembered her grandfather's words. This campsite was once the center of a curse. Those who disappear never return. But sometimes, they come back in other ways. As a last resort, they ran down the forest trail. The creature and the shadows behind them were in pursuit. They couldn't afford to stop, not even for a second, because they couldn't begin to imagine what would happen if they did. After hours of running, they finally emerged from the forest and reached the main road. In the distance, a car approached with its headlights on. Desperately, they waved for help. When the police arrived at the campsite, they found nothing. The tents had vanished. The campfire looked as if it had never been lit, and there was no trace of Ryan. The three friends tried to explain the horror they had experienced, but no one believed them. As they were leaving, Sophie took one last look at the lake. Her heart froze. On the water's surface, she saw Ryan's silhouette. His face was pale, his eyes empty. And in that moment, Sophie realized the horrifying truth. Ryan had become a part of the campsite. Four friends decided to spend their holiday at an isolated campsite. It was a hidden gem, barely mentioned on social media, yet known for its breathtaking lakeside view. However, there were eerie legends surrounding the place. One in particular stood out. Rumor had it that an ancient native tribe had cursed the land, and those who dared to enter never returned. Of course, the group dismissed these stories as nothing more than urban legends. But should they have taken them seriously? By the end of this story, we'll find out. By the time they arrived at the campsite, darkness had begun to set in. The sky was covered with thick gray clouds, and a light mist had settled over the trees. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, creating an eerie atmosphere. Lisa shivered. "This place is creepier than I expected," she murmured. The others laughed, trying to lighten the mood. As they pitched their tents and started a fire, Natalie wandered a bit further and stumbled upon an old, weathered sign. The words on it were nearly faded, but she could still make them out. "Warning! Do not leave when the mist falls at night." Her stomach tightened. What does that even mean? Could the legends be true? Natalie turned to the others. "Did you guys see this? Why would there be a warning like this?" she asked. Mark shrugged. "It's probably just an old sign meant to scare off tourists." He quickly dismissed it, but Lisa couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up inside her. As night fully settled, a thick mist rolled over the lake and crept through the trees. They sat inside their tents, chatting, when suddenly, faint whispers echoed outside. At first, no one noticed. But then, Natalie tensed. "Did you hear that? There's something out there," she said in alarm. Jason chuckled. "Probably just the wind or an animal," he said, unzipping the tent to take a look. But as soon as he peered outside, the smile vanished from his face. I think there's someone standing there," he whispered. The others scrambled to look. Through the dense mist, a dark figure stood motionless. No face was visible. No movement. Just an ominous presence. What was it? Mark, trying to be brave, grabbed his flashlight and shined it at the figure. But the light did nothing. It was as if he were shining it into a void. And then, the figure suddenly moved, vanishing into the mist. "That was weird. Maybe our eyes are playing tricks on us," Jason muttered, though he didn't seem convinced himself. The next morning, they tried to shake off the strange events of the night and focused on breakfast. But then, Mark noticed something unsettling. "Do you remember the trail we took to get here?" he asked, pointing toward the trees. The path they had walked just last night was gone. In its place were overgrown weeds and wild bushes, as if no one had set foot there in years. "Impossible." Natalie's voice trembled. "We came through here just yesterday. How can it just disappear?" Panicking, they pulled out their phones, but there was no signal. No GPS. It was as if they had been cut off from the world. Lisa's hands were shaking. "We need to leave." "I don't care how, but I'm not staying another night here." Everyone agreed. They packed up quickly and started walking in a random direction, hoping to find a way out. But no matter which way they turned, they always ended up back at the campsite. After hours of aimless wandering, they had no choice but to return. The mist over the lake had not lifted, it had only grown thicker. As night fell, the fog became so dense that they could barely see outside their tents. They were trapped. Then, Lisa peeked through the tent flap and froze. "It's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The others turned. The dark figure had returned, but this time it wasn't alone. One shadow, two shadows, more and more emerged from the mist, standing still at the lake's edge. Dozens of them. The last thing the group saw was the figures slowly moving toward them. Their screams were swallowed by the mist. By morning, the campsite was empty. No tents, no footprints, nothing remained. The only thing left was the whisper of 4 voices carried by the mist. And from that day on, no one ever dared to camp there again.